Spirit to guide my words, that they may glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. We grew up hearing Bible stories and singing hymns. When driving in our car, many times the family would sing hymns, especially near Christmas. Grammy Davis was a driving force. She was big into prayer, if you haven't picked up on that. She had a list of friends of about 30 that she prayed for every time, in the same order every time. I started church school at Riverview in 5th grade. My family went to church every week, Friday night vespers most every week. We helped the elderly get wood in. We worked on other work bees, did ingathering and pathfinders. I was very small. Harry Levy was very tall. We fought most every day. That is until Mr. Kongorsky came. He arrived at the school. He was our teacher, grades 6, 7, and 8. He had us write sentences, which was no big deal, so we continued to fight. Pretty soon the sentences were increased in length and doubled in number several times. The last sentence was 13 words, and I had to write 3,000 of them. The fighting stopped. So it does work. I graduated second in my 8th grade class. I had grown to a full 5 foot 1/2 inch. Eleanor Moody, the smarter of the two of us, was 6 foot 1/2 inch. Our graduation photos were priceless. In 1969, I went to live with Henry and Eva Perry and attended South Lancaster Academy. I felt out of place there. Lincoln Fickett befriended me. I had worked with Roy Fickett, his uncle in Maine. When his dad, Harold, learned of that, I was instantly accepted. Phil Murray was another person that took me in. He was very kind to me. He was a bit wild, was sometimes in trouble. He did get kicked out of school our senior year, and he had to finish in PVA the next year. The principal was very hard on some students. 3 girls were caught doing something. 1 girl was kicked out of school, but 2 of them were not expelled. They had parents that worked in the conference. 1 boy was kicked out of school because he bought a soda out of a machine on Sabbath. There were several types of things that, in my perception, were kind of unfair. After 2 years at SLA, I was quite disillusioned with the church. South Lancaster Academy was the big league compared to Norwich Walk, but they were much less Christian in my mind, and certainly I was rebellious then. After school, I returned home and did construction work for a couple of years, mostly with Roy Fickett. We built several houses and the Riverview Memorial School. I went to church some back then, but I was not at all faithful. I joined the Army in 1973, August. I was always a patriotic person. I loved the war movies. Sergeant Saunders of the TV show Combat was my hero. I knew that I'd be doing whatever they told me to do on Sabbath and other things, but I went anyway. I was pushing away the still small voice. I was running away. Just a few days ago, I was reading in the morning and Hebrews 4:13, and in the commentary it had this comment: "Try as he may, no man can run away from God." Turns out I would have done better if I'd read Jonah maybe a little bit more. Most everyone has heard the GPS lady when you've been traveling. Proceed to the route. Proceed to the route. Several times, right? Or make a U-turn at the next intersection. If we ignore her, she recalculates and does it again, starts all over. It's like the Holy Spirit, but unlike the GPS lady, the Holy Spirit talks quieter as we ignore. Lucky for me, he never gives up. When I was being processed in the Army, I was getting my dog tags. The lady asked me what was my religion to put on the dog tags. I was embarrassed to admit that I was a Seventh-day Adventist because they are conscientious objectors, and I, by enlisting, had waived that status completely. I said no preference. I'm embarrassed now to tell you that story. I went to basic in Fort Dix, New Jersey. We were being trained for Vietnam, but halfway through the training, Israel was invaded by Syria, Egypt, and Jordan. 50 years later, on the very same day, they were invaded again, as we know. I excelled in basic training. I got a trophy as a person being tied for top shooter, and I was the first out of 250 to disassemble and reassemble an M16 blindfolded. In AIT, Advanced Individual Training, I went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. It was for air conditioning and refrigeration. The rule was that whoever got first in the class got their pick of assignments. I was engaged to Wanda at the time, and if I got a stateside assignment, she could go with me. Now I wanted God's help. So I got to bed early, prayed for understanding, and studied. If there was a test, I didn't eat breakfast to keep my mind clear. I got only 4 questions wrong in a 13-week school. That was a post record. Thanks to Bud Roberts, the electrician I worked with at AUC, I excelled in the electrical portion. My friend Smitty was given a problem he couldn't figure out. On break, I helped him. When he tried to start the refrigeration unit he was working on, the motor just hummed, it wouldn't start. The instructor had taken a contact out of the relay, so the motor wasn't getting the correct voltage. But it turns out there's 4 contacts in the relay, and this configuration only required 3. So I took the unused contact out and put it in the missing place. So after break, Smitty went through the half a dozen or so pre-checks with the instructor, and it come time to turn on the switch, and he turned it on, it ran like a kitten. The instructor pulled the contact out of his pocket and looked at it, and we laughed. But I paid for it later. One of the instructors worked on a walk-in refrigeration unit most of the morning. First thing after lunch, he called me over and said he had a problem with his unit. He picked up a tarp, and there were screws and wires and springs and nuts. If anything could be taken apart, it was in fact, and there was a mountain of it. So Ray was my partner, and we worked 50-minute periods, and the 10-minute break. But in 1 hour, it was back together and working. I was first in my class, but I did not get the pick of assignments. I was assigned to Germany. When I got to Germany, my first sergeant asked if I could type. I said I could not. He said, "You'll learn." After 60 days on the job training in generators, I was called to be his clerk. So I did have to learn to type, but I ended up liking the job. There were 3 clerks when I started my tour, but at the end of it, it was just me. We had the largest company in Europe at the time. I was Radar O'Reilly. In addition to the 3 positions in the orderly room that I was doing, I was also the assistant CO's driver, the assistant postmaster, and the assistant armorer. I had a key to everything that was in the company. A new first sergeant came into the company and asked where the other clerks were. I told him I was it. He made some calls that morning, and there were 3 new untrained clerks that afternoon. They only had to be trained. I worked with them for 3 weeks. One morning, the first sergeant came into the office and said, "You are dismissed." I said, I had 3 months left in my tour. I said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "I don't care, just get out of here." He says, "In fact, if you want to go somewhere, you can use my car." So I worked with a machinist for fun and learned a lot. About a month later, the first sergeant called me into his office. There was a crisis in Company A. We were Company B. There had been no reports or paperwork issued for over a month. He apologized, but asked me if I could go over and help them get up to date. He told me that I was not to work, only to supervise. There were 3 very good typists assigned to me. In about 3 hours, I requested the company commander to come in and sign paperwork. He did so. There was quite a large pile. I asked him if he would check in every 2 hours. He did that. In 8 hours, we were caught up. That means I was back on vacation. Germany took me further from the Lord. I started drinking and partying. When I got home, I married Wanda. I think I had hardly been to church at all since I got out of the army. But one evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Cyril and Esther Robinson. There's a brand new lot of faces here, but does anybody remember Cyril and Esther? Yeah, we got a few. Well, they said the nominating committee has nominated you to be the youth Sabbath school teacher. So I said no several times, but it was Esther Robinson. So I taught Sabbath school for a year. I still did not go to church very much. The next year, there was another knock on the door. It was Cyril and Esther again. This time, they gave me an option. They said, we'd like you to continue teaching Sabbath school or be the Pathfinder leader. I took the Pathfinders. It was a little more my comfort zone. We tied knots, marched, ate wild stuff, built shelters, worked on badges, and worked on getting all the Pathfinders in uniform. We went on a winter camping trip. There were approximately 25 kids. We made our shelter out of boughs and tarps. We landed there Friday night. It got down to 5 degrees and we got snow. I was pretty restless, worried about the kids being warm enough. So I stayed up all night, keeping the fire going Friday and Saturday night. Finally, Sunday came. They were being picked up by their parents. I was saying to myself, never again. I couldn't be more fried. Most everyone had gone when one of the younger boys came back. I thought he forgot something. He came up to me. He said, thank you, Mr. Poirier. That was the best camping trip ever. So we had a winter camping trip every year. One of them, we took a 20-foot teepee and it had a fire going inside all weekend. The Indian Valley Pathfinder Club was the best in the conference. They excelled in larger camporees as well. In a camporee in Topsom, Maine, there was a competition with the guidons. I was asked to give the commands to every team for continuity, to keep it all even. That meant that I was not with my team. I was only in the judging booth. Our ladies crushed it. Memory serves, it was Lexi Hertz, Sherry Field, Ruth Turk, and Lisa Clausen. There had been a small group, a little club, watching intently. It was obvious that they had an interest, but they had no training, and they did not even have a guidon. After our ladies finished, I called them over to me and congratulated them. Then I asked if they would go work with the little club if they had an interest. After a bit, one of the ladies came and asked if she could be with them in the competition, meaning she would be the commander of that group. The other judges from all the other New England states actually said absolutely. So here comes 3 Pathfinders, never held a guidon before, led by one of ours, and they went through the deal and got a red ribbon. So the other people that were working with me thought that that was about the best show of sportsmanship they'd ever seen. The Atlantic Union Camporee in Hammonasset was in Connecticut was the biggest so far. They did not want to give first, second, and third place trophies or ribbons or whatever. So instead, if you completed the event under a certain time, you got a blue ribbon. If it was longer than that, probably a red ribbon, and so on. The event was building a 3-rung ladder. The top rung had to be square lashed, the middle rung diagonal lashed, and the bottom was your choice. You could do either. So how it went was the first Pathfinder ran down, lashed his first rung on, ran back, tagged his partner, they went down, and that happened until the ladder was built. And then all 6 went down, 5 held the ladder, 1 had to go up over the top and down the other side and run across the finish line to stop the time. The time for a blue ribbon was 5 minutes. Our time was under 2.5 minutes. The knot tying team leader was Rachel Hertz. She was the smallest in the club, but knew knots inside and out. I can still see her chewing gum and teaching a group of boys twice her size. In 1985, we went to Camp Hale, Colorado for the World Camporee. My brother Mike came as the cook, and his kitchen was the teepee. He and I made a cooler that had frozen food more than 7 days after the trip. It would take a lot more than an hour to tell you about that trip. I better go on. During this time, Wanda had helped with the club, and we were involved with the church. In a few years, she was baptized. During a camp meeting, Wanda and I received the Master Guide badge from Elder Ron Goodall, along with Randy and Thea Fickett, Debbie Luther, Jody Cochran, David Carter, and some others. I was working in Skowhegan PD at this time. In August 17, 1986, I started with the state police. The state police was the start of a downfall in the church and in our marriage. I excelled at the academy. I was the president of the class, the valedictorian, the top shooter, and I had the lowest gigs. A gig was a violation of your uniform or your room. 2 years into the state police, I was picked to be on the tactical team. It was extra work, but it was an honor. I was also a firearms instructor and a defense tactics instructor. All this took me away from home in the church. In 1992, I was unfaithful to Wanda and we divorced. Shortly after that, I was involved in a police shooting. I remarried and was married to Cindy for 2 years. In February 94, I went to Alabama for a 4-week bomb school. I was also picked to be cadre for the 43rd State Police Academy. That was a 22-week commitment. I was now also the lead defense tactics instructor. That meant that even on my days off, I had to be at the academy for the defense tactics class. In October, that was 94, New Hampshire State Police had a tactical team call. Our friend and colleague, Sergeant Jimmy Noyes, was shot and killed. We had just completed a week-long training with Jimmy that he had set up at Pease Air Force Base. It was a huge loss. Jimmy's son was just a kid at that time. He turned out to be the colonel of the New Hampshire State Police until he retired. Several days after the 43rd State Police training troop graduated, we lost Jeff Carolla when his cruiser left the road in Sydney going to a TAC team call. This was November 13, less than a month after Jimmy's death. Cindy and I were in Tennessee and just starting a vacation. We drove back to Maine in silence. There was something very wrong. The day after the funeral, Cindy and I were through. She left right away, and just days later, I was involved in my second police shooting. Because of the shooting, I was on administrative leave for a month. The shooting is investigated as a murder to show that it is justified. It is quite stressful. Living alone and out of work, I was close to the bottom. A telemarketer called me during that time. I forget what she was selling, but she asked if I had stress. You know, like just moved or recently divorced or loss of a friend. I told her that I had just moved, that my wife did just leave, that I had lost two friends in a month, and on top of that, I was involved in a shooting. She said she was sorry and hung up. I don't suggest you go through this just to get rid of telemarketers, but it did work. That Christmas, Brother Tim and Lori invited me over for Christmas morning to watch the kids open presents. Seeing Tyler and Katie so excited was great. It meant a lot to me, and for the first time in a long while, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was promoted to sergeant in December of '94 and had to move to Corinna. A retired trooper let me know of a house that was next to him that was vacant, and I took that. I worked a ton to keep busy and to keep my mind off things. I was headed home from the Orono barracks at 2 in the morning. I passed the Hogan Road exit, and a short way after that, there is a sweeping right-hand turn for those of you familiar with the area. I noticed a white smoky cloud in the median. I slowed down and could see that a car had gone off the road. That smoky cloud was the airbags had gone off. I called dispatch to send a trooper because they went home at 12. I could see that the car had started to dip just before the crossover and then hit the embankment of the crossover, and that launched it. It launched it a long way before hitting nose first and then rolled. I found a young woman in the passenger seat belted in. She was injured, but not life-threatening. I looked for the driver for a bit. Finally, I noticed some movement more than 100 feet away. It was the driver. Obviously not wearing a seatbelt, he had been thrown that far after the car had hit him without a seatbelt, nose first, and then spun and threw him out. When I got to him, I could see that he was severely injured, but thrashing around and trying to get up. I told him to calm down because he was hurting himself. He continued to fight and try to get up. I told him to calm down, that I had found his daughter and she was okay. He stopped thrashing. He looked at me and smiled and then died. The transformation from panic to peace was unremarkable. When I think of that moment, I think of the change in my sinful, stressful, hectic life to the peace of having a friend in Jesus. The daughter was in surgery that night, so the next day I went to see her. She already knew her dad had passed, but I described what I had experienced dealing with her dad, and his love and concern for her were remarkable. I believe she was comforted. Barb and I met in the spring of '95. Patrick was under 3 years old. He was a fairly active little guy. He would pull the cushion off the couch, line it up with the arm of the couch, climb up on the arm, and do a forward roll onto the cushion. He didn't do this once. He did it many times a day, every day. In college, he was filmed at the basketball court at half court with a basketball between his feet. He did a backflip, throwing the ball with his feet. The ball flew true and hit nothing but net on film. He still flips and works out all the time. One year, it's now been about 10 years, he did 500 backflips in a row, one every 13 seconds. You have to realize what I had to go through to teach him all this stuff. Barb's birthday is July 17th. I asked her to take it off and we could do something special. She got the day off, and while we were making plans, the phone rang. There was a tactical team call in Durham. She spent her birthday alone. I was going to make it up for her the next year. She took the day off again. The phone rang again. She spent her birthday alone again. She didn't fall for that anymore. Now I was commander of the bomb team and assistant commander of the tactical team, also a firearms instructor and a lead defense tactics instructor. All of this in addition to being a road sergeant. I was on call 24/7 with an average of 60 calls a year for the tactical team and the same on the bomb team. I had responded to several tactical team calls from New Hampshire and even one from Massachusetts. Bob and I were camping on Fox Island and Pierce Pond, if anybody's been there. We loaded our gear into a boat and went several miles up the lake to the island. It's an absolute beautiful campsite. Wouldn't you know it, I got a 911 page. So I left Barb and motored down to Cobb's camps. They had a phone. There was a tactical team call and the warden service was sending a float plane to get me. Barb didn't know anything more than I got a page. Gary Cobb, the owner, said he would go get her and bring her to the camps until I got back. Luckily, 20 minutes later, that was canceled. So it was resolved. I went back to the island and told Barb. She was less than impressed that I was going to leave her there. I had numerous week-long trainings in out-of-state schools. One training in New Hampshire was very busy. We had 20-hour days, and it was very intense. When I got home, Barb asked if I'd gotten her note. I asked what note. She had put it in the stack of underwear in my bag. I had taken only one shower all week and did not find it. She was crushed, as you can imagine. I'll read that note to you. Joe, I don't know when you'll find this. She does now. But I hope you're having a good week. Your mood has been down lately. I hope this training provides some stress relief and hopefully be uplifting to your mood. As you already know, I'm already missing you. I'm also looking at the future and seeing lots of time you'll be away. I wish I could be in your pocket always, but we know that can't be. I guess the positive to all this is that you haven't been away much this winter, except for the late nights. Summer is coming. Traveling will be easier, and maybe if the snow ever goes away, I could be helpful to you and uplifting. Remember, I love you, Barb. P.S. We miss you, Patrick and me. So we think we're in trouble, right, about them? Gets worse a little bit. In 1996, I was assigned to the academy. Again, it was very long hours, and I was there for sometimes weeks at a time. There was a tactical team call while I was at the academy. After the call, I would always call Barb to let her know what had happened and that we were okay, because I didn't want her seeing the news and seeing bad stuff there. As we were talking, she said that I needed to talk to Patrick. I had been gone for so long that he thought I had died, and she wasn't telling her. Chuck Parola, the trooper we lost, was a great buddy to Patrick before he died, so Patrick was familiar with the loss. I owe much to Patrick and Barbie for sticking with me. I knew I had to make some drastic changes, and in 2000, I made the decision to leave the tactical team. It was a very hard decision. That was my favorite part of the job. But it freed up a lot of time at home. When I left the team, they filled my position with two guys. Barb's reaction was a little surprising. She cried. She knew the guys on the team and their ability, and she trusted them to keep me safe. On the road, you work alone. I left the academy in January 2002 and was back as a road sergeant. I was still the bomb team commander and firearms and defense tactics, but I really had a lot more time with the family in comparison. In 2005, I was asked to go back to the academy to run the basic law enforcement school. This was my only responsibility. At this point, I was on the bomb team, but only as a member. So everything was getting better. I retired in June 2011. I took Dad on a trip to Fairbanks last year with my little cousin Mark Jones and his family. We were there attending a wedding of my cousin Denise's daughter. It was a great trip. Dad had been there in 1949, 50, and 51 in the Air Force. Mom was in a nursing home right then. Tom Carter, my cousin Denise's husband, had a computer that could Skype. When we left, Barbie bought a laptop that could Skype as well. We had it all planned. Barb would go visit Mom, and we would be assembled in front of Tom's computer. So it worked. A connection was made, and we could see Mom and Barb. Dad said hi to Mom, and she answered. They talked for a little bit. She was only listening and talking. Barb pointed to the screen several times. Finally, she looked at him. She said, Frankie. It was truly a modern miracle. She was amazed and delighted. Mom was bedridden for the last couple of years of her life. She was always trying to get me to go back to God. She was as faithful as they could get. I still resisted. I actually thought I was okay. Silly me, right? When Dad was in hospice, he was talking to my brother Tim about going to heaven. They were saying that they would see Mom and others. I chimed in that I would be there. Dad obviously doubted from what he said. I thought, I guess I'm not as okay as I thought I was. After Dad passed, we went camping with Mike, Tim, and Cindy and the families, and several nurses that took care of Dad. One of them gave me a devotional book. I read that faithfully. When I finished, I started reading the Bible and Ellen White's books, The Big Five. I take care of my neighbor when she was alive. She made it till 96. I bush hogged the fields for her twice a year. My cousin Mark would drop his tractor off, and I would spend a few days cleaning it up. One evening, Barb was away. I was bush hogging. The sun had set, but I was trying to get a little more done. It was getting pretty dark, and I was trying to get close to a bunch of gray birch trees in the middle of the field. The frame of the roll bar, when the roll bar is down, looks like a couple of goalposts, right? The right side goalpost caught an 8-inch gray birch and pulled it down. When you're working around trees on a tractor, you're always pushing branches away. So I didn't think much of it at first. The tree came down slowly, and then I couldn't push it away, and I was pinned on the tractor. The tractor stalled when I was dragged off the seat. I believe it was an angel who stopped it when it did, because if the tractor had gone just inches more, it would have taken my head. When the tractor stopped, the tree was across my neck, pinning me there. It was across my carotid artery, and I had to strain to keep pressure off. Has anybody heard of the sleeper hold? I can put you to sleep in 3 to 7 seconds. I knew that, and if I had that pressure on for more than that time, I would have passed out and died right there. So I couldn't relax more than a second or two at a time. No one knew I was on the tractor. The neighbor, she was elderly anyway, but she didn't even know I was in her fields. I thought about praying, but kept thinking, not yet. I can handle this. Silly me. After many minutes, I was able to break off branches and got a little bit more room. After a while, I removed more branches and I was actually able to pull my head out from under the tree. I had very good raspberries on my neck and ears. Now I was trapped on the floor and had to figure out how to squeeze out of there. It would have looked like the guy at the circus who can fold himself into an aquarium. It was just then that I knew God had saved me. The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced. I studied more. As I studied, I changed. Brenton and Diane Shedwick stopped by. He's a retired pastor. He taught at Pine Tree, I believe, right? He is my daughter-in-law's great uncle. While they were talking to me, they said, "We heard that you are now the spiritual leader of your family." It took me back a bit. He went on to say that the tractor incident had made a big impression on me. Well, it certainly did, but I didn't realize until then that Patrick and Christy had seen the change. I had received the miracle that Jesus promised us. I believe he still is changing me. I have a long ways to go. I decided to try church. I was a member of here in Norridgewock, but Wendy and Roger were in Corinna. I got the courage to go. When I pulled up to the parking lot, I stayed in the truck for a time, then swallowed hard and headed to the door. I was kind of dreading going through the door. Still in the parking lot, I heard someone say, "Uncle Joe." I turned and saw Jessie and Nathan Cobb. Jessie and her sisters were my pathfinders. It took the edge off, and now I knew somebody besides Roger and Wendy. Inside, I saw Colleen and Bill Fickett, which I've known for a lot of years. I started to relax. I was so impressed with the prayer and praise. Everyone was friendly and easy to talk to. The Corinna congregation is a big reason why I'm back, and I thank them. I have recently read that 80% of Christians do not have daily time with Jesus. They go to church for 2 hours on Sabbath and close the rest of the week. When we do that, we are depending on ourselves. I have been doing that, or much less. He said, "These trucks cost up to and more than $200,000. We don't have time for tire kickers." So Sam got back in his older pickup and drove to the Kenworth lot. That salesman asked what he could do. Sam says, "I want to look at your semis." He said, "Well, come in, I'll show you what we got." Sam Walton bought 100 semis. When the owner of Peterbilt heard the story, he fired that salesman. No kidding, right? He asked him why he did it. His his reply was, "I didn't know who he was." That's a terrible answer from a customer service point of view, right? We need to spend time with Jesus every day so we will know him. The more we know him, the more we'll hold him in awe. I have a granddaughter now. She has tiny, tiny fingers, but those fingerprints will be there all her life until after the death. After death, you can still get the fingerprints. They match no one's that's living today or that has lived before. You know Jesus, you hold him in awe. How about snowflakes? There are 50 feet of snow falls just into Asia off Japan. 50 feet every year. How many flakes is that? We get enough here to count, right? If we in fact know him, we may not have to hear Jesus say, "I never knew you." Taking God's salvation as a gift was hard. It was against my nature to not work, but accept. Many of us are doers. If something has to be done, we just plain do it. We work until the job is finished. I lost sleep, lost relationships, and lost connection with God, all because I thought I had to do it myself. As I read the Old Testament, I marvel at how many times Israel went from the top to the bottom. They would be warned that they were going to lose everything, and did in fact lose everything. But when they repented, every time they were taken back. Used to be that when I was reading that portion of the Bible, I would just kind of say, let's get on with more parables and stories. This is monotonous, up and down, up and down. I look at that differently now. He is telling me to learn from this and be true to him. How long suffering he is. I am so thankful for that. I know now that because of God's unending grace, I will see my parents again. Closing song is 341.